Hello and welcome to Something About the Beatles, episode number 232. If you're listening to this on Spotify or on YouTube, it's SATB Raw. Same thing, more or less. But the full-blown versions are available at somethingaboutthebeatles.com, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, a bunch of other platforms with pod in the title. But if you're listening to this, then you probably already know that, so there's no point in pointing this out. What I would like to point out, though, just as an aside, Terry Hemmert. I'm sure if you're a Chicagoan or Midwestern, or maybe even beyond that, and you attend the Fest for Beatle fans in August in Chicago, well, actually Rosemont, you'd be well aware of her as she has been the MC of the event since it began in Chicago in the 70s, in 77, downtown at Palmer House. I think Terry started doing it in 78 or 79 after that, the official MC of the show, doing an extraordinary job for all the years they've had that event going on in the Chicago area. But there are a number of Breakfast with the Beatles shows on the radio in the U.S. I think you've got other titles for similar formatted shows overseas. I know in England, Pete Dix does one. But in America, Chris Carter is the host of it in L.A., and I believe it's run on the SiriusXM Beatle channel as well when it runs on weekends. Chris has been a guest on the show. Might even be a listener, I'm not sure. But Terry has also been a guest on the show. If you think back in, I believe it was 2019, when I had Ramsey Lewis on the show, jazz legend, also a Chicagoan, and who better to co-host than Terry, whose extraordinarily deep knowledge of music runs to classical, jazz, reggae, rock, pop, and of course Beatles, bone deep in her case, because that was actually what got her on the path. When she became a fan, she saw a picture of the Beatles in a magazine with DJ Jim Stagg, who was local at the time, and she concluded that if she ever wanted to meet the Beatles, the way to do it would be to get into radio and become a DJ. And that's what she did do, graduating, I think, in early 70s for sure, but I know that WXRT, the station where she still is now, started in 1972, and she started at some point not that long after, but she's been there an extraordinarily long time. It's got to be close to 50 years now, because the station itself has been running for 50 years. In any event, she's been hosting Breakfast with the Beatles, I'm not sure how long, but the reason I'm saying this is just that I listen to the show when I can. It's on Sunday mornings, Chicago time, from 8 to 10, so it's 2 solid hours. But if you guys are listening, wherever you're listening around the world, at least around the country, Odyssey.com is the platform where you can catch it live. Look for WXRT Terry Hemmert. That's Terry with an I, Hemmert, Breakfast with the Beatles, and you can catch it. And the reason I'm pointing all this out is because there was a show that, another podcast called Metapod, which I appeared on. We taped an interview a while back, and it's just now airing. And one of the first things out of the box they asked me about was, what's my favorite cover of a Beatles song? And there are so many, it's too impossible to answer. So I gave my default answer, which you'll have to hear the show to know. But it got me to thinking that one of the extraordinary things about Terry's show, and it's in alignment with her super deep knowledge of all kinds of music, is that when you listen to her Breakfast with the Beatles, you'll hear the standard Beatle EMI recordings, but that makes up just a segment of the show. You will hear all kinds of solo recordings from all 4 of the Beatles. You will hear a lot of non-standard versions of EMI recordings, alternate takes, alternate mixes, that kind of thing. You hear a lot of that. But one of the other things you hear on the show is these really amazing covers that she curates of Beatle music that tend to go way beyond the mainstream stuff. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Susie and the Banshees cover of Dear Prudence or Helter Skelter. Other big acts that have done things. Breeders did Happiness is a Warm Gun, which would be more in the line of the kind of stuff that she comes up with. But then there'd be artists that you've never even heard of, a lot of them from other countries around the world, that do these amazing reinventions of Beatles material. So that's why I am, just while the thought is in my head, recommending to anybody who wants to check this stuff out. You get various different versions of the Beatle material, very broad and deep dives into Beatle material, as well as other artists doing Beatles material and doing it well. So do check out the Terry Hemmert WXRT version of Breakfast with the Beatles, which airs on Odyssey.com. If you're not a local Chicago and getting it on terrestrial radio, you can access it that way. It runs on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Chicago time, so you have to figure out what time zone it would be for you. But it is worth the checking out, and I will post a link on the SATB webpage so you can do that yourself. So today's topic and today's guest, it's really not focused on a single event, although that single event is what brought her really to my attention in a deep way. I was aware of her before that, but this was what really sealed the deal. And the event was the concert for George, held November 29, 2002, 1 year to the day after he transitioned out of the material world. And it was released on home video the following year as a CD and a DVD/Blu-ray of this sprawling, magnificent tribute concert. There's been a lot of tribute concerts that have been done in the history of music, and this one is just completely above and beyond anything I've ever seen in terms of what the vibe was that it projected of pure love for the guy that they were honoring, and the depth of the music, whether it's Beatles or solo or songs that were crafted for the occasion or comedy even, because that was a big part of the George persona as well. So you've got this magnificent send-off that musically was organized by Eric Clapton, and Danny and Olivia were the ones that made the phone calls and pulled all these people together. A couple of omissions that I think couldn't be helped and not deliberate, Bob Dylan being the big one, that you wonder why wasn't he there, because George had been there for his 30th anniversary doing My Back Pages when it was held in New York. But whatever, there were so many great artists there, it'd be hard to imagine how you'd fit one more in, given all these people that either played on George's records or worked with him, collaborators. You had the two living ex-Beatles on that stage, as well as fifth Beatle Billy Preston, Clapton, who played on a few George tracks back during the Beatle years. Sour Milk Sea and the Wonderwall soundtrack, as well as While My Guitar Gently Weeps and this favor being reciprocated with Badge. So you've got that stuff going back to the 60s. You got Gary Brooker, the late great, doing Old Brown Shoe. You have from the Wilburys, Tom Petty. You got a few people there whose names aren't as necessarily well known, like Andy Fairweather Lowe, who were on the stage. You've got Jim Capaldi from Traffic, as well as a solo career. But one of the things that I picked up on is that this is an amazing concert that you didn't have to attend to feel the power of if you watch the DVD or even listen to the soundtrack. And worth noting is how it was bookended in its way by father-daughter teams. You had at the onset Ravi Shankar setting the tone with a couple of his compositions, as well as The Inner Light, George's song squeezed in there. Anushka Shankar, his daughter, both playing sitar and conducting the Indian orchestra. So you've got that at the one end setting the tone. And the other end, you've got good buddy of George's going back to the early days of the Beatles, Joe Brown, and his daughter Sam. Now, you wouldn't know if you just bought the CD and didn't see the DVD that Sam Brown basically stole the show, performing a song that she sang on the original from George, his last recording, Horse to the Water, which was on the Jools Holland album, Big Band, Small World. And Jools Holland is there as well. And Joe Brown performing a rather obscure George song, That's the Way It Goes, from Gone Troppo, as well as the least obscure George song, Here Comes the Sun. But then closing out the show with I'll See You in My Dreams on ukulele. Something about the father and daughter opening and closing of this event that if you weren't feeling your heart being ripped out of your chest with pure emotion, then you're not human. Not that it was meant in a bad way, but just the extraordinary performance by Joe Brown that closed the show out, that certainly up there in all the concerts I've seen as a moment unmatched by anything. That you, if you haven't seen it, you have to see it, because you could not wish for a better tribute, a better way of being honored by your friends and people that knew you and loved you and worked with you than what these guys put together for George. It's just that amazing and extraordinary. And there's Sam in the middle of it performing Horse to the Water that brought the house down. And why that was left off the CD, I will never understand. but you have to see the film and get the visual anyway. Now, Sam, outside of Britain, she had a hit back around 1988 with Stop from her first album, title track and lead-off single, and went on to release another 7 albums afterwards through the years. She also worked a lot as a backing vocalist for any number of artists, and we talk about that a bit on this show. But I really wanted to get Sam on because I thought her performance was extraordinary. Her story is extraordinary. Her talents and gifts, if you are not familiar or if Stop is all you know, there is this amazing artist hiding in plain sight that you really want to get to know over the course of the 7 albums that she's released and an 8th one on the way. She worked with George. Her mother was a member of a vocal group, a trio called the Vernon's Girls in the early 60s. And they crossed paths with the Beatles. You'll hear the tune they recorded that was directed to the Beatles. And Vicki Brown, her mother, and Joe's wife, was somebody that did work with George, notably on the Shanghai Surprise soundtrack. And they were very tight, the Harrisons and the Browns, up until Vicki sadly passed away from cancer, like George, in 1991. But not before recording and releasing a song that is every bit as powerful as Joey's reading of I'll See You in My Dreams. Her song, Look for Me in Rainbows. I've linked to it on the site. You can check it out. It seems that way of grabbing you emotionally by the heart was not just restricted to Joe. Vicki had it too, and Sam through the course of her work. Now, she did a lot of work with Pink Floyd and David Gilmour, as well as a lot of TV stuff with Jools Holland. And that's how a lot of people know her. Again, though, not really so well known in America, except for maybe Concert for George. So that's what I'm hoping to change with this show. Every one of her albums is worth checking out. Just fantastic songwriter. And that's really, I think, where her heart lies, is a singer, songwriter, performer. Sadly, 5 years after the Concert for George, in 2007, was when she lost her ability to sing due to, she had a surgery done, but really, as you'll hear her talk, the doctors don't know what exactly the situation is, that she cannot sing the way she once did. And she had to then find another means of livelihood, which became starting these ukulele clubs in Britain, which just mushroomed in something big. And that's been going strong now for, I think, 10 years. And that's how she's been able to sustain herself. But during the lockdown period, she actually worked on a new album. And to the extent that she has these limitations with her voice now, it's not the same voice, and stylistically, it's completely different from the kind of music she was doing before. But it speaks a great deal about her gifts as an artist and her need to create and the gifts she has for doing it, that she's able to pull this thing out. I guess it will be coming out this year. You'll hear a little bit of it in the course of this show. Amazing thing. And I hadn't heard of it till we talked, and I was so glad that she shared it with me. And you'll get to hear a bit of it too. But really, this was a talk about somebody who knew the Harrisons well, worked with George, did that amazing star turn at Concert for George. And I think there's more conversations to be had with Sam, who's had this amazing life and seen a lot of music history and participated in it from her teenage years with Steve Marriott, going back that far. So you'll hear her describe that. Anyway, I was very thrilled to have her on the show. It's reasons like this that I started the show in the first place, really. I knew if I did it well, I'd be able to come into contact with people I was admiring from afar, and Sam was one of them. So we started out the show with my default question for every guest these days. Did you watch Get Back?
I have to tell you, I haven't seen the Get Back documentary yet.
Okay. That was going to be my question, is if you had any impressions, that's all.
Oh, okay. I haven't actually seen it because I'm not a big watcher of things. I'm a bit more of a doer of things.
Yes.
But I am looking forward to it, and I will get around to it eventually.
Yeah. I wonder if your dad has seen it.
I don't know, actually. He may well have done, yeah. I should have asked him if he wanted to come along on Zoom, but he's not very technical, so it's been tricky.
It is amazing all the people I've talked to whose careers have been in a studio that can't manage Zoom.
Yes, yeah. Well, it depends, doesn't it? A lot of artists, I think, are not very, it's about the music and the singing and the performing. It's not about and to be fair, my dad is 82, so We did kind of grow up more with computers than, I mean, my dad he will try and he's an intelligent bloke, but he's just he hasn't really got any patience with it, you know.
Well, maybe you can help him because I would love to have him on because his whole background going back, being on the telly and all that stuff, was paralleling the Beatles. He was a bit advanced.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I will certainly ask him. We can see if we can organise that.
I would love that. So you haven't seen Get Back, but being of the age you were, and certainly your father and your mother, you probably are aware of this, probably have seen the Around the Beatles TV special from '64 and know that the Vernon's Girls were on it.
Yeah.
So your mother and father both independently had this sort of connection in the periphery of the Beatles as they were taking off like a rocket. So being of your age, and maybe, I don't know if you were just getting awareness as they were breaking up of them, but did you feel a presence of them in your life?
From my point of view, they were always there. But obviously I know something about it. And I know that my mum worked with the Beatles and got to know them, especially, I think she got on well with George from the beginning, from, you know, the late 50s, because my mum's also from Liverpool.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. So, well, the Vernon's Girls are all from Liverpool. They were all kind of recruited from the Pools company. Do you know what the Pools are?
No.
So it's like a gambling thing. So it's
like a lottery?
Bingo. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've heard the expression winning the pools.
Yeah. So sort of in the 50s. Uh-huh. And I don't think my mum actually worked there. I think they kind of put them in the office for a week if they found a, you know, nice looking girl with a good voice and good legs for the dancing, you know. So, but she was in the Vernon's Girls, and that would have been the late 50s. And they certainly worked, as you say, on TV shows. But also my mum was from Liverpool. So I think there would have been some sort of crossover there.
Mm-hmm. Maybe saw them at the Cavern or any of the other venues they played.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Beatles supported my dad. I think it was at the Cavern. I'm not sure, but definitely George thought that was really funny and amusing, was that basically they supported Dad, you know. So that was a nice connection.
And they did a cover of Picture of You.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that.
I will send it to you.
Oh, my gosh. I'd love to hear that.
And George sings it.
Wow. That's incredible. I never knew that.
Yeah. They did it for the BBC, so it would have gotten out there. But the story, and I'm trying to remember where I saw this, but there's a great picture in '63 of George when they shared a bill. And you probably know about this, where your father went off to the loo and George got Mike McCartney to take his picture with your father's guitar.
Yes, I do know that picture, yeah.
Yeah. I just wonder what your father's reaction was if he ever found it or saw the picture later on. You did what with my guitar?
I think he definitely saw it, yeah. I'm sure he wouldn't have minded. He's kind of not precious about, well, he is, but he wouldn't have been with George. One of the advantages of being a Beatle, you see, is you don't get told off by Joe Brown when you nick his guitar.
Pulled rank, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So on the subject of your father and you're coming into the world, the story's been told, and I think I've seen interviews where you've confirmed the song, Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, being written and offered to him.
Yes, I think it was. I can't remember who wrote it. I'm trying to remember, but he didn't do it.
And Herman's Hermits did, and had a number one with it in America.
Yeah.
Right.
There you are, you see. Uh-huh. Yeah. My dad, I suppose in our family, my dad's a real musician. He loves music and he loves playing. And he's very much an entertainer. But he's not really one for the great big PR stuff all the time. You know, it was more about the music for him.
The pure artistry.
Yeah. And I think maybe I'm probably a bit the same. But when I came out to promote Stop in America, because I did, they just didn't really seem that interested. You know, Jerry Moss was not really. I think also I probably didn't behave particularly well. So if you held me up against Rosie Vayler, who was coming out at the time, I didn't stand a chance. I definitely was not a beautiful model who kind of hung out with all the right people in LA. You know, so.
Well, when your aesthetic is the Simon Cowell, I need to be able to sell this, what's commercial? Yeah, you wouldn't have fit that mold. And I love the story about, now again, we're rambling, but 43 minutes. And your label demanded you put a cover on it of something people would know. You're like, no.
Yeah. Well, why would I do that?
Right. Why would I do that? This is a body of work. Why would I taint it and debase it that way? And it's a brilliant, brilliant collection. And it speaks tons about you that you stood your ground at your own commercial peril to do that.
Yes, I think, as someone said, it was the height of my commercial decline, basically. But, that didn't bother me, really. I mean, I'm not particularly well off. I'm not rolling in money or anything, but I couldn't do anything differently, really, I don't think. I think it was partly to do with the era because, female singer-songwriters were... You had Joan Armatrading, so you're coming out of the late 70s, but the 80s was so not about female singer-songwriters. And I think I was never seen as a female singer-songwriter, whereas Suzanne Vega, who was also on A&M, she's very much seen as a singer-songwriter. So, I didn't really get it all. I wasn't very good at the whole marketing thing, and I didn't know how to play the game.
Right, which is sort of counterintuitive given you're basically a showbiz kid, in the sense that your parents were well known and worked for decades in the business, but you're an artist. You perform, but you're not commercially driven, which is a great thing. The value of your music is something much more profound and meaningful than tossing off records that, lowest common denominator will sell to the masses that you still have to live with and be performing for decades after.
Well, I think the thing is, it's very apparent now, so it's really easy to draw comparisons. But I think different people make music for different reasons. And fame was never one of my reasons. In fact, I would run a mile from it, really, although I did recognize that if you want to get your music out there, to a degree, you have to talk to people and let them know what it is and who you are. And I get that. But I think the problem was, which I think is the same for many artists signed to record labels, certainly a little while ago, is that the record company almost propose an image for you. It's the way they see you. But that's such an unrealistic and one-dimensional way to look at an artist. George is the prime example of this. His music is so eclectic, and the stuff with Jeff Lynne is so very different to his earlier stuff. And I just think that it was always clear that it was commerce against art when you signed to a record company. You needed a very strong manager to kind of keep that relationship on a good footing. And my relationship with A&M just broke down because my manager wasn't interested and she was great, but she couldn't work with the head of marketing, who was a bit of a dick, really. I'm sure he was fine outside of doing record company work, but it's just so hard when someone's saying, look, you need to look like this and you can't wear those boots. And we need to do 21 interviews a day. And, with Stop, I didn't do any music for nearly 3 years because I was just promoting all the time. Whilst I enjoyed it because I met different people and it's nice to talk to different people, you really do get sick of talking about yourself, And then you end up doing it by rote, and they're reading you the biog and you're giving the same answers. And it's so unalive to be doing that, I think.
Almost scripted.
Yeah, it wasn't really for me. That's not to say I don't enjoy doing interviews.
Well, good for me. Looking back at that, because again, as somebody that came into your career later than at the start, I was unaware of the early couple albums. It wasn't until the Jools Holland thing that you brought to my attention. It was almost jarring to see you as this Marilyn Monroe blonde in the videos are produced. It's like, wait a minute. But then you hear the music independent of the visual. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool. And again, to sort of go off one of these tangents, because this is going to be a stream of consciousness thing. The live thing that you did a year ago, or released a year ago, Wednesday, the something of April, you and keyboard, no band, and there's such power in that stuff. And I'd seen on YouTube a while back, you were on some morning television show, I guess in Britain, performing at the piano stop. And that's the version I loved. And I was so happy to see that you put out a whole collection of performances from your whole career in that setting, because that's where I see them and hear them as the most powerful.
Yeah, I guess different productions appeal to different people. For me, to listen to myself singing live, I find excruciating. Although now, having lost my voice, I was like, my brother and I kind of sat there, he sat here and I'm here, and I'm going, actually, it's not too bad. It's quite good, it's not bad. The one-woman shows were a really good thing for me to do, I think, because it's just such an intimate connection with the audience. And you lose all of that kind of entertainer side of what you're doing. It's very much about me letting them into my world and just playing them the music. So, yeah, I really enjoyed doing those. I actually really needed to do that because at the time I've been touring with Jools Holland for years. I loved doing it, but it's such a massive wall of sound. And, my part in it is kind of almost like an acting part in some ways, because you're going on and you're doing this one genre of music and looking a certain way, which I loved. I loved everything about it, but I needed something different. I needed to do something for myself. And the gigs were very small. They weren't big gigs, But I just loved them, really enjoyed it.
And there's nothing wrong with those records, especially after the first couple where you were taking more control of your career, say with 43 Minutes onward, which are very effectively arranged and produced. It's not like a record company came along and imposed a sound on you and you were kind of like caught up in the machinery. They're very well produced records. And then hearing these songs in this sparser, more intimate setting, it just gives you another experience of what's already good music. So it's nice to have both.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, it's good. I love doing it.
Was that recorded all along with the intent of putting it out as a live album one day?
Yeah, it was. We only recorded 2 shows and it was just one of them, and it was a Wednesday. So that was kind of...
Was it April?
It was in April. So I'm really bad at organising things and recording stuff. And after 43 minutes, I had a lady manager called Lisa Denton, and I'd been working with her since I was 50, younger than that, actually, 13 or 14. And I then went through sort of various different managers who were all great. But as I say, it was never really about the success of it. It was about making the music. And it still is, for me. Well, I've just finished a new album, which is completely fake. It's all processed. It's all auto-tuned, all synthetic. It's like nothing like I've ever done before. And I've absolutely loved it because I can't sing. So just great to sit there with the auto-tune and go, okay, I want to do this harmony. Oh, yeah, I'm going to put this harmony on now. Or maybe I'll do another harmony, So wow. I really enjoyed that side of it.
That's a departure.
It is. I'll send it to you.
Okay. Sam Brown succumbs. Well, you have to keep going with the letter thing. So I'm not sure what letter you're up to now, spelling out your name with the album titles.
It's the last one.
Okay. Whoa.
It's called Number 8.
Oh, perfect. Very good. Is that coming out this year then?
I hope so. Yeah. Well, yes, it will be. I mean, when we say coming out, I just like, it's not like some big official release or anything, but I think I will do vinyl on this one, and it's got a whole sort of concept to it. So I am excited about it. I'm slightly apprehensive about playing it to sort of long-term fans because there's quite a lot of spoken word and it's very poppy and kind of electronic. So it really is very different to everything else I've done.
But it's your songwriting.
Yeah, so I co-wrote the whole album, really as a project in lockdown, I suppose. There's so many done things like that. And we wrote every Tuesday, and we wrote about 15 or 16 songs, and there's 12 on the album. And I hadn't done any writing, and I just had no confidence. But Danny's a really old friend, and I wrote a lot of songs with him in the past. So he wrote quite a few. In fact, he's written on most of the albums. Not all of them, but most of them. And he's great. He's a writer, a keyboard player, and a producer, and he's worked with all sorts of people. So he's good.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be something great to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. Are you doing any kind of promotional videos for it?
I will be doing some stuff, yeah. I'm going to do something with my daughter. We're also thinking of some kind of stop animation. And one of the songs is kind of like a club tune type thing. It's quite cheesy, and there's a dance routine that goes with it. So I'm hoping to get people sort of drunk in their kitchen doing the dance, So,
the COVID hangover album. That's great.
Yeah.
So do you remember what age you started taking the singing seriously? That's something you could do and wanted to go forward in life with?
Yeah, well, I think, I started writing when I was about 13, maybe slightly before that. And I didn't really think about I never really considered whether I was good enough to do it or not. I remember the thing of doing session work and just learning about my voice and how to blend with other people, which was great because my mum was an amazing singer, an amazing backing vocalist.
So this was just your sort of environment absorbing this stuff, not consciously, Mom, teach me something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly that. So just joining in, really. In fact, I used to go with her to sessions and hope that someone wouldn't turn up so that I could kind of step in there, you know. My voice was quite young. It took, I think I was probably about 16 before it started to fit in with the more adult voices.
And that would have been around the time of the Small Faces project you came into?
Yeah, well, I think I was 13 when I did the Small Faces project. 77 was the session. I think it came out in 78. So, yeah, so in 1977, I was 13.
I remember it got attention here because Jimmy McCulloch had just left Wings, and that was where it went. And it was like, oh, the guy from Wings is playing with Steve Marriott now. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Kenny Jones, too.
Yeah, I still see occasionally. And he's great. He's lovely, amazing drummer. And Steve, I got on very well with Steve. He used to stay at our house a lot. And my mum and dad were very good friends with him and his wife at the time, Pamela, who's from the South. She was great. And Steve was always very good to me, very nice to me. Me and my mum used to do live gigs with him.
Oh, wow.
And he used to get me to sing. I used to sing I Can't Stand the Rain and a couple of solo bits and pieces. So, yeah, Steve was great.
Was any of that stuff recorded?
Don't think so. I don't have recordings of it.
Oh, that's too bad. That would have been amazing.
We did backing vocals for Steve on quite a lot of stuff. But it was always demos. And again, he was very much, I think in those days, musicians and writers and artists weren't particularly good at doing, crossing that border into putting it out there. Whereas now we all do everything, don't we? We all kind of do the whole thing,
Your own labels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was in England, actually, for the first time in April of 91 when he died in that fire. That's my memory of the first time I went to England. That was the big story of the day.
So you know that my dad married Steve's ex, don't you?
I did not know that. I knew that he remarried and George was the best man.
That's right. And I have a lovely memory of going to Friar Park and Olivia poking her head out of one of the top windows with her rollers in. Hi, Sam. Hi, Liv. So Manon was Steve Marriott's partner, and my stepsister is Molly Marriott, who's a fantastic singer and artist, and also knows Peter Frampton quite well now. So she was, I think, 11 or 12 when my dad and Manon married. So yeah, big connections there.
Yeah, wow. It never ends. So your mother having a friendship with George in particular going back to the early 60s and before the Beatles exploded. At what point did they start working together? Was it well into his solo years that he started bringing her in more regularly to contribute to his albums when he's recording at Friar Park?
Well, I think, as you said, Gon Troppo was probably one of the first things she did with him.
Yeah, that's pre-Shanghai Surprise, I guess, as I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it was. And the backing vocals on Shanghai Surprise, I just think it's just beautiful, isn't it? It's really joyous and light. And Mum always said that George was always like that. He'd just come up with these really wacky ideas, which is very Beatles, isn't it? They had this kind of creative freedom about what they did where there were no holds barred, which I think probably came from partly, well, obviously from them, but also from the relationship with George Martin, who I think he encouraged them to think outside of the box in that way. Because a lot of musicians are like, they're a guitarist and they stick with that. And a lot of singers are afraid to speak within their singing and they're afraid to make noises within their singing. If you think about the old blues artists, if you think about people like Cab Calloway and, all those kind of 30s and 40s artists.
Louis Jordan.
Yeah, they used their voices in so many ways, didn't they? And I think now people are very narrow in their parameters with music. They kind of stick with one thing. And that was one of the lovely things about George, is when you went to do something for him or sing on something, it wasn't going to be kind of different for different sake, but he was just very creative. It seems such a poor word to use, but everything was very rich and very full of life and new and alive and authentic, That's not everybody, that's not everybody. I don't even know if that's the rest of the Beatles. To me, I think George was particularly good at that.
That receptivity to ideas. And when you speak of George Martin, who, of course, was the perfect facilitator for that, it's counterintuitive coming from everything you read about the culture of EMI, where it was all by the book. You don't do that ever. And this is the way we do things. We've always done it this way. And how dare you even think of not doing it that way? And he's the guy running a label, an A&R guy, and then producer, who does nothing but break rules, and the results show for it. And he was with the perfect group of proteges to enact all that stuff. So the story of the Beatles over and over again is just the right people at the right time.
Yeah. And I think, the recording studio it's quite sad, really, because it's a rare thing now to go and do something in a recording studio. But, when you're all in a room together and you're all there for the same reason, and you're there to work things out, you're there to have ideas, you're there to try things. I mean, when we recorded my second album, April Moon, the whole band was in the studio every day, and everyone would just hang out and come up with ideas and do silly things and, playing fire extinguishers and whatever it is you do, But they are such great places to make music in. I mean, they are, that's what they're paid for. But I think the Beatles also laid down some rules, which were, there are no rules.
Right. You have to know the rules before you break them.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
That's interesting. Yes, clearly it's a place for creativity, but to take it that extra step beyond what is expected and go someplace where it's an exploration. You don't know what's going to come out on the other side. And they were great, great explorers.
Absolutely. They definitely were.
Yeah. One of the things I hear in your voice, which is not like, oh, she's copying that. I could hear it as an influence, and maybe you can tell me I'm full of it. Aretha.
Yeah.
Was she somebody you listened to?
Definitely. I mean, I don't know how people learn to sing. I only know how I learned to sing. And it was definitely a two-pronged attack. So it was through singing with people. And when you sing with people, if I ever got my voice back, which I don't think I will, but if I did, the thing I would want to do would be to sing backing vocals, because it is just joyous to sing with two other women or blokes or whatever and get that harmony and that feeling. It's just wonderful. So I learned through that. But I guess mostly I learned through listening to people. And I would just sit in my room. I had a record player that Steve Marriott gave me, actually, which was really good. And I'd sit in my room with the record or with the lyrics, and I would just play them over and over again. And the people I did that with were quite a weird mix, actually. So Joni Mitchell, Kate Bush, Joan Armatrading, Randy Newman, Stevie Wonder, massive Stevie Wonder fan, Aretha. I'm a big Aretha fan, so there's definitely some of that in there. But I think once you start to learn to sing with somebody, by singing along with somebody, then, you keep doing it and you keep pushing that. So that those little inflections, I'm sure, definitely have come through in some things.
Yeah, absolutely. And through listening to the body of your work, there's a definite Sam Brown sound, even with disparate pieces of music. But there's a style that is uniquely yours that I absolutely can hear. And I look forward to hearing things I haven't heard before, because I have a sense of where you're going to go. And it's like, when you're anticipating that, let's say, chocolate cake or something like that, you got the idea formed in your head and it's going to be so delicious when you get it. And that's kind of how I feel like when I listen to some of your stuff. It's like, oh yeah, here it comes.
Well, I don't know if you'll enjoy the next one. It's not so much about singing anymore, but I had great fun making it.
And you're doing something different. You're breaking rules. It's going to be interesting to hear. And everybody knows the circumstance. It's not like this is what you followed up, your last album of singing with. There's a lot in between.
The other there was one album that I really love, actually, and I think I learned a lot from. And that is the Thelma Houston album, which she made with Jimmy Webb, called Sun Shower. And it is beautiful. And the production is just bonkers. It's really brilliant. And also Cyrita as well.
Oh, yeah. Who also sang with George.
Did she? I didn't know that.
Do you know Dream Away from Time Bandits? It's on Gone Troppo.
Oh, is it?
Orion, Orion. Clearly, your dad knows the album because...
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. Fabulous song, and it's him with Sarita Wright.
Fantastic. She's just brilliant.
Yeah. And she sang, of course, they had the big hit with Billy Preston.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So there you go. You've got a huge list of my influences, and there are more. I love Quincy Jones. Funnily enough, I never really got into jazz until I started singing in a jazz band. And even then, I didn't really listen to it. So I've kind of, jazz has been, I mean, I love Ella. She's just amazing. But I've kind of was more into, from a jazz point of view, more into 40s music. So close harmony stuff. You said Louis Jordan. I love Louis Jordan. And who was I thinking of?
For the harmony stuff, you're making me think of Pied Pipers, Joe Stafford.
I don't know them, but I may do. I may have heard them.
Yeah, Tommy Dorsey did stuff with them. And of course, that Sinatra was with them for a time before he completely changed the currency from the big band to the singer.
Well, very well.
Sure. Yeah.
Apparently, Frank Sinatra was Amy Winehouse's biggest influence.
Is that interesting?
And actually, if you listen to her phrasing, you can actually really hear that.
I'll have to re-listen to everything through that prism.
Yeah.
So did you attend any of the recordings your mother was doing with George when he was working at Friar Park with her?
No.
Okay. So at some point, you got brought in then to work with him. Was that after you'd already been working with Jools?
Well, there are a few things I did with him.
I know about the My Sweet Lord 30th version.
Yeah. I mean, that was so weird. I don't really even know why he asked me to do it.
How weird was it?
Well, when someone like George says, I want you to replace me. No, I don't think that's a very good idea. But actually, it's a very subtle difference in the sound. But it sounds really, I mean, even I can't always tell if it comes on somewhere. I'm like, is that me or is that George? I can't quite tell. But it was great. It was great fun. The studio at Friar Park is fantastic. And I've spent a lot of time there. I've been there doing a lot of sessions. I have been there. My mum and dad have been there, but more kind of social stuff, really, where they've just been having a jam or something.
So you witnessed the ukulele stuff with your father and George?
Yeah. Usually be drinking tea in the kitchen, looking out at the garden. But yeah, they're really lovely people. And they're very kind. When my mum was dying, they were very, very kind to my mum, and they did some lovely things for her. They brought over, I don't know if you remember the trio Bulgarka. So they're 3 Bulgarian women singers. And it was, I think Kate Bush used them on one of her albums. And it's a very raw sounding voices, very kind of straight and quite harsh. But they are amazing, and it's traditional singing. But Olivia and George, I think, flew them over to do a show. My mum was very ill. It wasn't, she was quite close to dying. And basically they invited us down to the sound check, Friar Park. So we kind of went down there, and just the 3 of us sat there watching these amazing singers. Very kind people.
Wow, I'd never heard about that. Did you guys live close by?
My mum and dad did. They lived about 20 minutes away, yeah.
So then you did the My Sweet Lord track. Beyond Horse to the Water and the Jools record, was there any other George recordings that you were actually on? Were you on Cloud 9?
Oh, yeah, there was. I'm just trying to remember. I need to see the track listing. I can't remember. Let me have a quick look. Brainwashed, I did.
Oh, okay. The last one.
Yeah. So Jools and I went out to record with George. It was quite shortly before he died. I think he was in Switzerland or Italy or something.
That's right.
Yeah, so we went out there to record him, and that was really interesting. And we all sat around and chatted and played music, and it was really good.
So you're speaking of the session that was in his final months for Horse to the Water. How did that come about? Was it a song that he wrote for the Jools collection? Did Jools approach him and say, hey, I'm putting this record together. I'd love to have a song from you?
Yeah, I mean, who wrote Horse to Water?
Oh, George did. I think Danny has a co-credit on it too.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Basically, what Jools used to do is he'd get people, his friends, as the albums are called Friends, but he'd get people in that he knew, or some people that he didn't, and he'd just do a track with them. He'd talk to them. I mean, he's amazing to work with, Jools. I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, and he's definitely unique, but he has this wonderful thirst for art, broadly speaking, for art. He loves all art, and I think he sees music as art, and he is a great sort of protector of it and exacerbator of it as well. So I think that whole thing of getting different people into different songs was really I mean, obviously, it's good for him as well because he gets artists in and that's good for selling records and stuff. But he's also just great to be around. He's incredibly encouraging. And I think he and George always got on very well. And he's also a brilliant musician. He's a great player. So I don't know. I guess he would have known George, I think. They probably mixed in the same circles.
Yeah, I'd wondered about that because the one connection I knew, and it's not a musical one necessarily, was that when they did the anthology, Jools was the one asking them the questions.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that would have been, 94, 93, whenever it was, and it came out in 95.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I don't know if George had any awareness of Squeeze before that or what Jools was up to.
I think he probably did. I mean, he was he loved music. He was always interested and listened to music, So, yeah, quite possibly. I don't really know.
Another A&M artist. Is that how you guys connected?
No, I was doing more PR and there was a pilot show called The Happening. So it was after The Tube and it was before Later. And they started this series called The Happening and I did the pilot for it and I sang Stay With Me, Baby on it, I think. And I just met him through that and we just totally got on straight away. We got on really well and we've always got on well. I still speak to him now. So he's just a good friend and we just clicked and I did a couple of things. I did that TV show and I think there was something else came up. And then he said, I'm doing this gig at Hackney. Do you want to come and sing? So I went and sang. And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. And then I sang with him on and off for many, many years.
And Valentine Moon, which is on that collection that George is on, how did that come about? Was that something you just worked on together and stuck it on the album, or was it laying around already?
Yeah, so basically we wrote well together. So we did a lot of writing together and we kind of got into the habit of, so Jools really wanted to get, because he's very popular in England, the UK, even though people knew him, his music hadn't kind of travelled outside of that. So we used to go over with a kind of pared down band in usually March, I think, February or March every year before the main touring started. And they're usually about 10 of us, I suppose. So it'd be the rhythm section and me and Jools.
Gilson Lavis from Squeeze, was he part of that then?
Gilson, yeah. And a few horn players. And we go out to Europe and we do a couple of gigs in Amsterdam and mainly Holland, actually. And we just got into the habit of when the gigs were over, Jools and I would stay on and just do writing, just write for a couple of days. And so we wrote it then. We've just sort of decided we quite like to write waltz and yeah.
Nice, yeah. It's a beautiful track. And I was like, I got to see if there's a live performance of this. And I found on YouTube from his show, you guys did it. And I thought, this is great. And then instead of the piano solo, you guys had a flute player. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what I want to hear. But it's cool. It had the visual, but it's like your ears were wanting to hear that great piano solo he does.
No, yeah, he's a great player. But Bammy's, he's kind of legendary and sort of royalty, really. He's a lovely man, really lovely man. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And the solo's great. It's just that classic thing of just playing the melody.
When you did the recording for Horse to the Water, the George version that ended up on that album, were you guys all aware that he was running out of time?
I don't know if we were, actually. I mean, he really wasn't well. I think it was pretty obvious, but I don't know why, but no one really discussed it. Didn't seem right to discuss it because it was still just George. George was just being George and being lovely. And so I don't think we really thought about it. I didn't think, oh God, he's gonna pop his clogs any minute now. Felt lucky to be there.
I believe that album came out in October because on the CD package, the music publishing for that song, you might be aware, he wrote R.I.P. 2001. And everybody's like, oh, that's really dark, George. And then a month later, he did pass. And it's like, wow, he's getting in that one last joke before he shuffles off.
Very like him.
Yeah. So then you've got the song recorded. It comes out on the album along with your song, Valentine Moon. Big Band, Small World, I think was the UK title.
Yeah.
So at what point did the planning for the concert for George come along? And was that, in fact, spearheaded by Clapton? Is that how that came together?
I think it was Olivia and Eric. That was my impression. I don't actually know. But all of those people had played with George and were George's friends. And I was very surprised, really, to be asked, because my dad was George's friend. I knew George and I worked with him, and I knew Olivia, and I got on great. We're friends. And Danny, of course. And it was a year, wasn't it? I think it was a year after he died.
A year to the day is when it took place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking months of preparation must have happened to pull that huge thing together. And then you have the Indian musicians too, and Python. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts.
Well, yeah, it was just like a party for George, just celebrating him and all his friends. All of those people were his friends. And he had close relationships with them all. And I think they all probably wanted to do something. I can kind of hear Liv saying, hey, we're doing a thing for George, and do you want to come and do a couple of songs? That's how she is. She would be like that. And of course, everybody wants to do it, But Jools, I think Jools was probably asked, and Jools asked me to go with him to sing it. So they just said, we're doing this. And then I kind of got involved in the other stuff, the backing vocals and things. But it was an amazing day. It really was incredible.
What were the rehearsals like? Because you got so many musicians and they're coming and going on the stage for different songs. Was that pretty intense, or did it come together pretty quickly?
I think it came together it was very natural. There were no problems. I think for all those people out there who aren't involved in the music industry, the thing is, in my experience, there are very few artists, musicians, singers who are not nice. It is really a minority. Most people I've worked with on every level, really the most famous person you've ever met or the least famous person you've ever met, musicians are just generally really pretty easygoing people. And to be a good musician, you have to know how to listen. And I think that really showed in that instance, because you've got all these incredibly strong characters up there, all just watching and listening and then just doing the right thing. And that's how it worked. And it was beautiful. The whole thing was beautiful. I think partly because George was beautiful, and also because Olivia and Eric and Danny, I think they were the mainstay of it. They just created this fantastic atmosphere. There was no rush. Everything was put together well. It was a great thing to do. I couldn't believe it. I went with Jools and I walked on the stage in rehearsals, which are always my favourite part, I have to say, the sound check. And Jools is famous here. And so everyone's like, hey, Jools, lovely to meet you, blah, blah. And then they're all like coming over to me and going, Sam, it's great to see you. Because I've worked with them all, but always as a backing vocalist. So it was quite odd to be kind of taken into that.
Fronting that big all-star band.
Yeah, to be accepted as an equal to them. So it was an amazing thing for me to do. And all of the people involved were great. Jim Capaldi, such a sad loss. He was amazing. And Tessa Niles and Katie Kassoon are fantastic singers. And everyone was brilliant. It was a great thing to do. And of course, rehearsals, that was the best. Rehearsals were the best, always.
Because of the relaxed vibe to it?
Yeah, and you're doing something together. You're going through a process together. You're working it out. You're checking it's okay. Saying, no, we need to take a couple of bars out there, or, we're going to do this there, or, we need to bring it down, or whatever it is.
It was clear from the first time that vibe that you talk about, that you felt there, absolutely projects when you watch the video of it. You're aware that you're watching something special. I've seen dozens of concert films and everything from Bangladesh to The Last Waltz. There's everything special in its own way. That seemed really special. I don't know what it was, but it certainly came through. Maybe part of it was the way it started, almost like a church service or something, and then the Indian musicians doing their thing, and then bringing out the bigger band, and one by one, all these people renowned with their own spotlight coming together for this cause, and the stage dressing with George's portrait, the young George and the older George. But really, Horse to the Water, and everybody I've shared watching that with is like, she stole the show. The audience is on their feet right after that. What that must have felt like.
That was the energy that was in the room. And for me, I suppose that time was largely thanks to Jools, actually. I really felt like I completely came into myself. That was singing was because I sang so much with Jools, and I really discovered a different side of what I did, So I always was a singer, but I think I just grew up. I grew into myself, and that was the pinnacle of it. And it was just such a great time for me as a singer. I'd been doing vocal training for a long time then, so I didn't really have problems with my voice, or didn't have any problems with my voice actually until it completely went. And I felt good about myself probably for one of the first times in my life. I loved it. I loved everything about singing. I felt confident. I was nervous, but it was great.
Just a command of the stage. Every time I watch that, I pick up on something else. You really project this vibe of enjoying the music that's going on around you. Like you're absolutely listening to it. And it's not like, don't look at me. I mean, look at these guys. This is something amazing going on. It's not about me, which is counter to most people that put themselves in front of a band. It's everybody look at me. It was like a perfect ensemble and everything was right. It was just perfect. Danny cranking away like young George there and the acoustic and Eric doing his lead and everybody that was on that stage. And Jools looks like he's having the time of his life too.
Oh, yeah, he's great. I mean, it was an amazing experience. It really was. Very lucky to have had it, I think.
Well, we're lucky to have it too. So it comes through. So for the people that don't know, and that might know you through that, or might know Stop, or might know some of your other records, this sort of second act with you as far as the ukulele stuff, it came about through the circumstance. And for the people that don't know, what is it exactly that happened that you couldn't do it anymore?
Well, I still don't really know what's wrong with my voice. It could be so many things. Been to see lots of people. I used to do a lot of voice training when I sang, but I had a breakdown in my early 40s. I was still working and I worked through it, but I put all that emotion into my voice. And I wonder if my voice just got to a point where it said, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. Then one would think that perhaps it would recover, but it hasn't. Sometimes if I do voice training, it gets better, it improves, but it's never good enough for me to go out and sing live like I used to. But, it's been quite a long time now, and doing voice training every day is quite depressing. It's intense. I have to give it a lot of time, and I see an improvement, but the main fundamental issue is still there. So I kind of have put that aside, and the reality was I lost my income. I mean, I have a small royalty income from Stop, but, I completely lost all my income, and I had 2 kids and I was on my own. So I tried doing a bit of vocal teaching, and I worked for a florist friend, and I had loads of jobs. I mean, I'm a worker. I like working. So whatever I could do, I was doing. But it just wasn't cutting. It wasn't like having a job. And so I started teaching. A couple of friends said, will you teach me some chords? Because they'd seen me do a couple of bits, with Jools and stuff. Quite honestly, I was a bit shit at the ukulele. I really wasn't that good. And I'm still I don't think I'm amazing. So I had like 9 people in my front room. There was a power cut, so we ended up playing in the dark. And it kind of just went on from there. And then I had 20 people, and then I built a shed in my garden, and we went from the front room to the shed. And then we went from the shed to the local hall, and then there were like 50 people. And then it was like, okay, this is too many people in one club. So I started another club. So I now have 9 clubs a week that I teach. And I suppose it's a small business, really. And it's been really interesting because I wouldn't have considered myself to be a teacher. But I suppose I liken it to being on stage, in that when you're on stage, you're in a room with all these people. And what you want is for those people to be happy and to go away happy and to enjoy some music. And it's exactly the same at Uke Club. Although as time's gone on, obviously, it's now nearly 12 years since I started Uke Club. And so there has to be a core of actually people learning something, because I thought they'd just come for like a couple of months and then leave. But they just come back year after year. I can't get rid of them. I don't mean that. They're brilliant. I've kind of made it how I want it to be, or how it works for me. I find it difficult because my voice is not good. So inspiring people to play when you can't really sing is because you have to sing the song to them and sing with them. So it depends on the group. Every group's different. And it is like a gig in that it's about a collective energy in a room. And I really like it. I've just started taking breaks because through lockdown, I was teaching every single week for 2 years, and I kind of got to a point where I just didn't feel I could do it and needed a break from it.
I was wondering how COVID would have affected that, because it is obviously a very social situation in close proximity.
Yeah.
And did you like switch to Zoom, or, how does that happen now? It seems like maybe an aspect of the success that it had was that social aspect, because it's almost like a skiffle franchise or something where everybody is doing it for the pleasure and being able to hang out and do something with your friends that's fun. That doesn't take a whole lot of skill. And naturally, that widens the net considerably because, I don't have to be Gary. Awesome.
You're absolutely right. It is very social, but it's been interesting from a social point of view as well, because there's a lot of different types of people in there. You've got very well-off people who are retired and have got loads of money, and you've got people who can only just afford to come, and you've got, there's lots of different, you've got mums, you've got single mums, you've got dentists, doctors, embalmers, all sorts of things. And actually, what was quite problematic at the beginning was people are very judgmental, especially when they're adults and especially when they're mature adults. And I really had to consciously just go, hang on, everyone is welcome here, and everyone, quite a few times at the beginning, I had to sort of lay the law down a bit so that it was inclusive. Because for me, that's easy because it's like a gig, because loads of different people come to gigs. You don't go, well, I'm only going to do this with that person, or I'm only going to play to that person. You get up there and you do what you do, Yeah. So
they get a life lesson along with the uke playing.
Well, many life lessons, and so do I. But it's been really interesting, and I've learned absolutely loads. It's been a great thing, actually, really good thing. I'd really love to be able to sing again, but I can't see it happening. And so ukulele world is not a bad world to be in.
Yeah. And I love the fact that despite this loss, we still have new Sam Brown in the form of that live album to enjoy that we hadn't heard before. So I'm happy for that.
Yeah, I know. I don't think I'll stop. I think I'll make more albums. So I can sing very low. And I think the next thing I'll do is I think I'll probably write a ukulele album. I'd like to do some covers on the ukulele, because I've never done a covers album before. So I'd quite like to do that.
The EP is original material, right? The 5-song uke.
Yeah. I always look down my nose at covers, very snooty about it, But actually, through doing covers with Uke Club, you learn a lot about songwriting, and about what works and what doesn't. So I think I'll probably write a uke album, and I'll have like a double album with originals and covers.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I Can't Stand the Rain on uke. Yeah,
it works, actually. It kind of works. As my dad said, he would kill me for repeating this now, because he's actually a bit nicer than he used to be. But I played him one of my new songs, and he said, who's that bloke singing? Cheers, Dad. Yeah, that's me.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song by The Corgis.